Okay, picture this for a second. You're at this really formal dinner, right?
Mhm.
But it's in these ancient ruins in Panama. And you notice your host, Mark Zuckerberg, is stuck between these two people who seem like, I don't know, distant cousins of the Panamanian president.
Oh, wow. Awkward seating.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's no Wi-Fi, you're in ruins. So what do? Maybe sneakily swap some name cards in your purse.
Resourceful. A bit James Bondish.
Right. Or, how about this? You're literally fighting off a shark, bare hands,
Yeah.
just trying to survive.
That's terrifying. Completely different level of crisis.
Or even weirder, maybe, telling your own parents you genuinely can't breathe and they just hit you with, oh, it's mind over matter.
While your lung has actually collapsed.
Exactly. These aren't movie plots. They're like real glimpses into the world our subject found herself in.
It's quite the collection of extreme situations, isn't it? From, diplomatic maneuvering to actual life and death moments.
It really sets the stage. Because today, we're digging into the first-hand accounts of someone right there at the heart of it all, the rise of Facebook.
Yeah, we've got these personal stories, her journey through this rapidly changing tech world, run-ins with really powerful people.
And a front row seat to decisions that, well, ended up affecting pretty much everyone.
It's that human story behind the massive tech company, isn't it? Moments of real smarts, moments of just absurdity almost.
And some genuinely scary stuff, too.
Definitely.
So the plan today is to unpack these experiences, pull out the surprising bits, and really try to understand the human side of this huge story.
We'll look at the ingenuity, the weirdness, the fear, giving you a perspective you probably haven't heard before on how this company worked from the inside.
That Panama dinner story, for instance. It seems small, but it tells you a lot.
Right. It's not just bad seating. It's high stakes, no backup.
Exactly. Formal dinner, ancient ruins, powerful people involved, no internet to even check who's who.
And her solution is basically sleight of hand with place cards.
Yeah, in her handbag. It's like this little moment of social problem solving under pressure. Shows you the kind of improvisation needed sometime.
And then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the shark attack.
Oh man, that account is just brutal.
Visceral is the word. The struggle, the feeling of needing air, the actual wounds.
Yeah, she describes the puncture wounds, skin missing.
Mm.
It's graphic. And the swim back to shore terrified other sharks would show up.
Pure survival instinct kicking in.
It really makes you wonder how someone processes that kind of trauma.
Especially when you contrast it with, say, the collapsed lung incident.
Right. Being told mind over matter when you literally can't breathe.
It's almost surreal, isn't it? The dismissal of something so obviously serious.
And that feeling of not being believed, even when you're saying, I'm dying.
It's a different kind of fight, isn't it? A fight just to be acknowledged.
And the description of losing consciousness. Like lifting off like an airplane.
That peaceful feeling she had to fight against. Chilling.
Finally, getting help. But the first doctor is dismissive too, until someone else realizes.
And she overhears them saying, she's dying. Or maybe even she's dead.
Just unimaginable. It really drives home how precarious things can be.
And linking those traumas, she said the doctor cutting into her ankle later felt worse than the shark attack.
Yeah, that feeling of it being like her own autopsy while she was awake.
It's incredibly disturbing, that sense of violation, even during medical treatment.
A really stark comparison. Okay, just pausing here for a second around the 3-minute mark. Welcome, everyone, to Audiobook Quiver.
Hey there!
We're really glad you could join us as we unpack these pretty intense firsthand stories today.
Yeah, it's quite a journey we're mapping out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're finding this exploration interesting and you want more of these kinds of analyses and surprising insights, definitely hit that like button for us.
Please do, and follow the channel, maybe ring that notification bell.
Yeah, so you don't miss out on future deep dives. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, back to it. So after these really intense, personal, almost survival moments, there's a big shift, right?
Definitely. Early 2009, she has this sort of Facebook epiphany.
Right. After all that physical trauma and, not being believed, Facebook suddenly becomes, what, a connection.
Exactly. She's in D.C., feels kind of isolated. It's a new city. And this platform, which you maybe saw as just for college kids before, it becomes this way to connect with people, feel a bit more grounded.
And it wasn't just personal, was it? She started noticing politicians using it.
Yeah, like politicians back in New Zealand, her friend Chris Hipkins was one,
Oh, interesting.
and they were talking directly to people on Facebook. That felt really new and different back then.
That's a key observation, realizing its political potential so early.
It clicks for her. This isn't just social, it's changing how power works, how communication happens.
And she gets this conviction right, that Facebook could be bigger, more world-changing than even GMOs.
Which is a huge statement, considering her background working on GMO regulation at the UN.
Yeah, she'd seen that whole global debate unfold, so to think Facebook was bigger, that's saying something.
It shows the sheer potential she saw, which leads to this kind of funny situation.
What's that?
Well, she has this, like, almost religious belief in Facebook's power, and now she has to convince Facebook itself, like pitching the revolution to the revolutionaries.
That is pretty ironic. They didn't see it the same way yet.
Not entirely, it seems. So her first pitch to Marne Levine,
Yeah.
she connects the dots, right?
Yeah.
Uses her UN experience, says, look, just like we needed rules for GMOs.
You're going to need rules for data, for content, on Facebook.
Exactly. She was basically predicting the massive regulatory fights that were still years away. Pretty sharp.
Shows real foresight.
Correct.
But Martin was skeptical.
Sounded like it. Kept asking, what's the job here? What's the value? They were still figuring that policy side out.
Then there's that really awkward phone call. Should Mark take credit for the Arab Spring?
Yikes. Talk about a loaded question.
Especially with Facebook trying to get into China, right? Claiming you helped overthrow governments probably isn't the best look.
No kidding. It just throws that whole geopolitical tightrope walk into sharp relief, even that early on.
Balancing freedom with, well, market access.
Always a tension there.
But amidst all this global strategy stuff, there's this very human, worrying moment. Her sister calls.
Oh, yeah. Ruthie, thinking she's dying, can't reach their mom.
Just a sudden injection of real life, personal fear into the middle of these huge strategic talks.
Grounds the whole thing, doesn't it? Reminds you these are people with lives outside the bubble.
So after all that, pitching, the weird calls, she kind of gives up hope on the Facebook job, right? Starts looking at moving to Australia.
Yeah, seemed like it wasn't happening. She was pursuing a communications role down there.
And then Marn calls out of the blue with an offer.
Right. And even then, Marn's apparently like, I'm still not even sure this is a job.
Not exactly a hard sell.
No, it really shows how new and undefined that whole policy area was for them at the time. It wasn't a clear path.
So, okay, she takes a plunge. First day, DC office, what was the vibe?
Apparently quite different, utilitarian, exposed pipes, fake graffiti.
Not like the fancy lobbying firms in the same building then.
Exactly. A real contrast. Like Facebook was the disruptor, even in its office decor.
And she forgot her laptop on day one.
Classic. We've all been there, right? First day nerves, feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Totally relatable. Then she gets thrown into briefing Sheryl Sandberg for the New Zealand Prime Minister's visit.
Yeah, and immediately runs into this culture clash.
How so?
Sheryl apparently just assumed her friends from New Zealand could come along to the meeting.
With the Prime Minister. That's not really how government protocol works.
Right, but Marn's instruction was basically make it happen. Private sector rules, or lack thereof, connections matter.
Wow. Okay. And she meets Debbie Frost.
Yes. That sounds like quite a character. Very blunt, very direct.
What was the line? Something about the UN?
Yeah, she apparently said something like, if you found fucking seeds at the boring United Nations interesting, then Facebook would be chaos.
Huh. Sets the tone, doesn't it?
Definitely. And turns out she wasn't wrong about the chaos.
But the actual meeting with the PM? Not so smooth. Mark Zuckerberg didn't want to be there.
Apparently stated it quite clearly, I don't want to meet him.
Ouch. Super awkward. How did they handle that?
Well, then Sheryl arrived.
Ah, the Stardust moment.
Exactly. Our source describes this transformation from, a normal-looking woman to suddenly glamorous, charismatic, captivating.
She just owned the room.
Sounds like it. A totally different energy than Mark's reluctance. Highlights her skill in those situations.
Then there's the tour with the German delegation. That sounds like comedy gold.
Oh, yeah. Their reaction to the office aesthetic, the unfinished look, the posters.
Think wrong, move fast, and break things.
Exactly. The Germans were apparently just baffled. It was such a clash with their, more formal, established expectations.
Silicon Valley culture shock.
Big time. And then Marn apparently made things even more awkward.
What did she do?
During the introductions with the Drummonds, She just randomly mentioned being Jewish,
Out of nowhere.
seemingly, led to this incredibly uncomfortable silence, a real diplomatic fumble.
Yikes. Okay, so alongside the culture clashes, there's also this theme of wealth, right?
Very much so. Anecdotes about people like Sam Lessin being price insensitive.
Meaning money's no object.
Pretty much. And Debbie Frost, who'd made bank from the Google IPO,
Uh-huh.
apparently considered her Facebook salary economically meaningless, just a totally different planet financially.
Compared to our source, who was, grateful for the job and the paycheck.
Right. It highlights that huge wealth gap even within the company, a subtle but constant background fact.
In this intense culture of work, 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 sacrifice for the mission.
Oh, yeah. The idea that Facebook wasn't just a company, it was changing the world for the better.
Facebook family.
That whole ethos, very demanding, very mission-driven, designed to foster intense loyalty.
But even in that environment, real-world problems were starting to surface, like policy issues.
Exactly. She started working on the first public community guidelines and the first transparency report.
Important first steps, trying to figure out the rules of the road for this giant platform.
Acknowledging the power, the responsibility, setting some boundaries, documenting government takedown requests.
But then you get the organ donation idea. And that really shows a split in thinking.
Big time. Cheryl sees it as like a data problem, a potential marketplace of organs.
Which sounds pretty cold, actually.
Yeah, whereas our source is raising flags about, the legal issues, cultural sensitivities, ethics, potential for trafficking.
Real-world complexities versus a tech solution mindset.
Precisely. And it leads to this clash over using Facebook's voice.
The megaphone.
Yeah.
Cheryl wanted to push organ donation.
But Mark believed Facebook should be a neutral platform. He didn't want the company taking sides or pushing causes.
And someone sent an email pushing it anyway, supposedly on Cheryl's behalf.
Apparently. And Mark was furious. It really shows the power struggle, the different visions for what Facebook should be.
That tension seems like a recurring theme. Then the focus shifts really hard towards growth.
Yeah, growth becomes the mantra. Javi Oliven's team is sort of the embodiment of this. More users, more engagement, always more.
Post-IPO pressure, maybe?
Very likely. Just relentless focus on those expansion metrics.
And Javi's briefing Mark on Snapchat. Pretty blunt.
Yeah. Apparently just told him it was mainly used for sexting.
Keeping the boss informed on the cutting edge of teenage communication.
Gotta know your competition, right? Even the less savory aspects.
The trip to Colombia with Javi sounds wild, too. Formal summit, then a salsa club.
A real mix of worlds. High-level meetings, then Javi thinking he spotted Hillary Clinton in a nightclub.
Seriously, was she there?
Apparently not. Just adds to the slightly surreal vibe of it all.
But the pressure wasn't just about fun trips. Reaching 1 billion users suddenly wasn't enough.
Right. It went from being this huge milestone to being framed as a crisis because growth wasn't accelerating enough.
Wow. So the pressure ramped up even more. Target difficult markets.
Like China.
Yeah.
And other challenging places.
Which leads to Javi telling her to just go to Myanmar.
Yeah. Go to Myanmar and sort it out. Like, it's that simple.
With zero context or understanding of the situation there, presumably.
Exactly. It really shows that sometimes overly simplistic, top-down approach to complex global issues just make it happen.
So she goes, and the description of Myanmar's capital, Nay Pai Ta, eerie.
Totally. That massive, empty 20-lane highway, the huge, imposing presidential palace, sounds almost dystopian.
Definitely sets a strange mood. And then the encounter at the ministry.
Getting her passport taken, being led into this big, quiet hall.
Must have been nerve-wracking. And then the guys with the camera and the bright light.
Yeah, her first thought was apparently ISIS hostage videos, which they'd been dealing with on the platform. Truly terrifying moment.
But it turned out they were just curious about why Facebook was blocked.
Seems so. A massive misunderstanding, but scary nonetheless.
And the actual reason for the block is fascinating.
Right. The old junta controlled the internet via cost and surveillance. But suddenly, with the country opening up, cheap mobile internet changed everything.
They couldn't control it the same way, so they just blocked it.
Exactly. The tech leapfrogged their control methods, an unintended consequence of progress.
And the rotary phone call from her contact Tom there just highlights the weird mix of old and new tech.
A perfect little detail showing the communication hurdles in a place like that.
Okay, shifting gears back to internal stuff. Cheryl's book, Lean In, launches.
Yeah, and this creates some friction in the DC office.
The office housework issue.
Exactly. The expectation, apparently unspoken, that the women in the office should handle the logistical stuff for her book events, even though they were already swamped.
Kind of ironic given the book's message about women leaning in, not doing admin tasks.
Right. A real disconnect between the public message and the internal reality, it seems.
Then the pressure around the meeting with Japan's Prime Minister Abe. It was all about the photo op.
Pretty much. Getting a picture of Abe holding Lean-In, his office kept saying no.
So she felt like she was smuggling the book in.
Yeah, like it was contraband, just intense focus on the PR, the personal brand building.
And after the meeting, which apparently went okay despite the awkwardness, the car ride back was silent.
Painfully silent is how it's described. And this quote about celebrity being a mask that eats the face.
Implying Cheryl was maybe losing herself to the public persona?
That's the interpretation. A moment of sadness almost for seeing the mask take over.
It paints a complex picture. Because then you also hear about these outbursts,
Yeah, like dressing down Debbie Frost for being a few minutes late because of traffic.
creating this atmosphere of fear.
Seems like it. Where
Yeah.
people were afraid to make the smallest mistake. Very high pressure, potentially toxic.
And nobody stepped in when Debbie was being humiliated.
Apparently not. Which says a lot about the power dynamics and the fear of crossing Cheryl.
Yet people were still clamoring to work for her. Moths to a flame.
The allure of power and success is strong, right? People wanted to be close to that, even with the potential downsides.
And the personal toll starts to show again. Pressure to come back from maternity leave super early.
Yeah, juggling that insane job with a newborn, Sasha, taking the baby to rallies, traveling constantly.
It sounds absolutely exhausting and incredibly stressful.
No kidding. And then that horrifying incident with the nanny getting locked out.
Oh, God, yeah. Baby locked inside the apartment, nanny locked out, and she's stuck in Mexico with Mark.
A parent's absolute worst nightmare. Made even worse by being thousands of miles away.
Just brutal. It really emphasizes the personal sacrifices involved.
And touches on that theme of how the support systems for senior women maybe weren't always acknowledged.
You mean like with Cheryl's Women's Day events?
Yeah.
Talking balance, but having immense help herself.
Yeah, the narrative suggests a bit of a disconnect there, praising balance while benefiting from resources most women don't have.
A performative aspect, perhaps.
Possibly. Then we pivot to Mark's big project, Internet.org.
The plan to give free, basic internet access to developing countries.
Right. The idea being get them online with basics and eventually they'll pay for more data. A clear business angle.
But framed as philanthropy with the .org name.
Exactly. Altruistic branding for a strategic growth initiative.
And amidst all this, another slightly absurd moment. The breast pump misunderstanding in the hotel gym.
Huh. Yeah, just a weird cultural cross wire. Adds a touch of the bizarre.
And a reminder of Facebook's own product failures, too. Project Buffy.
Oh, right. Their attempt at making a Facebook phone didn't exactly take off.
Shows even giants stumble.
Yeah.
But the issues get more serious, like the situation in Korea.
Yeah, clashing with the government over cybercrime, appearing to stonewall them.
And asserting Facebook's values over Korean law.
That seemed to be the stance, which led to a very real threat of jail time for Mark, Cheryl, and Elliot Shridge.
Wow, actual jail time. That's serious.
Definitely raises the stakes, shows the potential consequences of that confrontational approach with national governments.
And the internal dynamics. Cheryl being shocked she wasn't automatically on Mark's private jet.
It really highlights the internal pecking order, the competition for perks and access to Mark. Intense.
Then the senior staff retreat at Mark's place. Sounded
TBH.
unique.
Yeah, described as feeling like ancient Greece. Followed by a super competitive game of Settlers of Catan.
Rich tech people playing board games intensely. A specific kind of vibe.
Definitely. And Mark trying to seem like a man of the people on that Asia tour?
Taking photos with tourists who didn't even recognize him. Awkward.
A bit, yeah. And then that really strange request he apparently made.
What was it?
A riot. Just tossed out there during the tour. Very unsettling.
Yeah, what does that even mean? What was he thinking? Very ambiguous and weird.
Leads into more awkwardness in Asia, right? The Indonesian batik shirt incident.
Oh yeah, Mark refusing to wear a traditional shirt for the meeting with President-elect Jokowi.
Seems like a small thing, but culturally insensitive, potentially. Resisting local custom.
And then things nearly got really ugly. Mark's security head almost punched an Indonesian general.
Todd, yeah. Apparently almost decked the head of Jokowi's security detail. Could have been a massive international incident.
Thank goodness it didn't escalate. The whole Blue Sukan thing seemed tense, too.
The impromptu visit with Jokowi, Canceled, then back on due to security worries. Shows the risks of those public appearances.
But that Asia trip also seemed like a bonding experience in a way. Mark friended her on Facebook.
Yeah, a sign of a closer working relationship developing. Conversations about what it's like being, Mark Zuckerberg.
A glimpse behind the curtain. And Mark started getting more interested in politics.
Specifically in Japan, before meeting PM Abe, asking about their political system shows his focus broadening.
But then, back to the megaphone issue. Using Facebook to push voter turnout in Hong Kong.
And China reacting negatively. That direct clash again. Promoting democracy versus appeasing Beijing.
And the contrast between her bosses, Marn and Joel Kaplan.
Very different styles. Joel apparently saw things much more through a U.S. power lens, almost like the State Department worked for Facebook.
Wow. A really assertive view of Facebook's place in the world.
And that played out in places like Russia, right, taking down content the government wanted removed.
Trying to balance free speech ideals with the reality of needing to stay operational there.
A constant tightrope walk. Mark apparently got frustrated he wasn't looped in earlier on those big calls.
And the policy teams on the ground in these countries felt caught in the middle.
Yeah, feeling like Mark's high-level principles didn't always fit the dangerous local realities of defying governments.
That disconnect between HQ theory and on-the-ground practice. Then the meeting in Colombia, late and unprepared.
Seems so. The president wanted to talk about the FARC peace process, a huge deal for Colombia.
And Mark wasn't ready. And later, Facebook blocked FARC content anyway.
Yeah, a missed opportunity for engagement, followed by a policy decision that seemed maybe uninformed or insensitive.
And the meeting in Ireland about taxes.
With Taoiseach Kenny. Right after the EU cracked down on the double Irish loophole Facebook had used, more global scrutiny.
Definitely. And Cheryl prepping her Lessons of Davos email. There was disagreement there, too.
Yeah, the suggestion was to address European leaders' tax concerns directly. But Cheryl apparently leaned towards
just spending more money on political campaigns instead.
that seemed to be the priority, investing in influence rather than addressing the core criticisms.
Okay, so back to Internet.org. It wasn't really taking off as hoped.
Progress was slow. But Mark was personally really invested in making it work, doubling down.
Which led to the Summit of the Americas in Panama, trying to get Mark on stage with Obama.
Right, a lot of negotiation. He ended up getting kicked off the main panel,
Ouch!
but got a prime front row seat, and Obama gave Internet.org a positive shout-out. So, calculated wins, sort of.
And suddenly, everyone wanted to meet Mark. Presidents, telco CEOs.
The tide turned. Suddenly, Internet.org had momentum, partners lining up. The summit was a big boost.
But not everyone was convinced. Like Brazil's President Rousseff.
She pushed back hard, asked tough questions about the whole zero rating model being sustainable.
And wanted real investment in infrastructure, not just a free app.
Exactly. A much more critical perspective than some other leaders. Less easily impressed.
Then Mark sends that thank you email. Seems a bit ambiguous, given the tensions.
Yeah, maybe acknowledging the effort, but maybe not fully agreeing on the approach or the outcomes. Hard to read.
And the weirdness continues. That Facebook page for Xi Jinping's U.S. visit getting millions of followers overnight.
Despite Facebook being blocked in China, raises huge red flags about bots, manipulation, something fishy going on.
Definitely suspicious. Then the UN speech preparations sound chaotic.
Elliot Schrage being dismissive of other world leaders.
A certain arrogance creeping in.
Seems like it. And the UN itself wasn't initially keen on making internet access a formal sustainable development goal.
Differing priorities. And the scheduling madness in New York, trying to move Big Bird, asking for an audience with the Pope.
Just totally over-the-top demands, blurring lines between tech CEO and head of state.
And the speech itself, disaster. The wrong video played.
Total technical meltdown on a huge global stage. Pre-recorded video playing instead of Mark speaking live. Hugely embarrassing.
Wow. And things weren't going well for Internet.org on the ground either, right? India and Brazil.
Massive backlash. Huge concerns about net neutrality, about Facebook becoming the gatekeeper to the internet.
Leading to the name change.
To Free Basics, yeah. Trying to salvage the brand, but the core criticisms remained. A major PR crisis.
Especially in India. Threat of a total ban by the regulator, TRAI, partners pulling out.
It was looking really bad. A full-blown crisis for the initiative.
But Cheryl was trying to keep leadership calm back at HQ.
Downplaying the severity, perhaps, trying to project confidence despite the mounting problems.
And this is when Mark starts admiring Uber's tactics.
Yeah, their aggressive break-the-rules approach. He apparently got frustrated Facebook wasn't being tougher with politicians.
Once more, Street Fighter tactics.
That seemed to be the vibe. A desire for a more confrontational style.
And that chilling line, anyone who opposes us is an adversary.
Even human rights groups raising legitimate concerns about free basics. That's a really stark, polarizing view.
Yeah, painting critics as enemies. Then they set up the war room for India.
An actual dedicated team to fight the negative PR, push free basics hard.
Huge ad campaigns, organizing protests, allegedly with free T-shirts as incentive.
Yeah, pulling out all the stops to manufacture public support and pressure the regulators.
Including that pop-up message to all Indian users.
Telling them to support free basics and framing net neutrality advocates as hurting the poor, using the platform itself as a lobbying tool.
That feels like a major line crossed. And TRAI was furious about the 17 million identical submissions they got.
Saw it as a blatant abuse of Facebook's power, just flooding the consultation process.
But Elliott was still confident they'd win.
Apparently so. Seems like an overestimation of their influence or underestimation of TRAI's resolve. They ultimately lost that fight in India.
A major defeat. Okay, the narrative shifts again, more personal. Cheryl's private chat. The bed situation.
Oh, right. Her insisting on sharing the single bed on the jet. Extremely awkward blurring of boundaries.
And the memory of the snoring tent from a previous flight just adds to the weirdness.
Definitely paints a picture of some unusual and perhaps uncomfortable dynamics at the very top.
Then the focus on getting U.S. citizenship. The civics test.
A personal goal amidst all the professional chaos. Seeking some stability, maybe?
And the arrest of Diego Zodan in Brazil.
Facebook's VP for Latin America. Arrested over a WhatsApp issue, but the lines were blurred.
And Mark's reaction seemed distant. More worried about a Facebook post than Diego's situation.
That's the perception conveyed, a potential prioritizing of optics over employee welfare, even in a serious legal crisis.
Then traveling to the heart of the Zika outbreak in Brazil while pregnant.
A huge personal risk, and her U.S. doctor being dismissive about the danger.
Shows how global health threats weren't always taken seriously back home yet.
And then the really serious health crisis after giving birth. Difficulty breathing, near death.
Just terrifying. And wanting specific colleagues there, Tom, Debbie, Sadie, shows those intense work bonds formed under pressure.
Despite everything, those connections were clearly deep, but the recovery was rough, hiding how bad it was.
And that video call with a senior leader who focused on her appearance, not her health.
Just tone deaf. And Joel pushing her to go to an offsite in India right after, despite her fear of flying and health issues.
Shows a real lack of empathy or intense pressure to put work above everything. Cheryl offering to fly with her feels insufficient.
A gesture, maybe, but doesn't address the underlying pressure to push through serious health concerns.
And at that India offsite, she raises concerns about the U.S. election and misinformation.
And gets shut down by Joel, basically told it wasn't her area, and hey, the Trump campaign was spending a lot of money.
Wow. Prioritizing revenue over potential democratic harm. A really critical moment.
Absolutely. A potentially dangerous blind spot, or worse, a deliberate choice.
So the APEC summit in Peru. Mark arrives, and he's angry about the election discussion.
Yeah, didn't like the suggestion Facebook played a role. But then his email while she was on leave, asking about global governance.
She says thinking was evolving, starting to grasp Facebook's actual power.
That's the interpretation. He's seeing the global system, seeing Facebook's place in it, and maybe wondering how to use that power.
And the bizarre request to the Peruvians about safeguarding his sperm due to Zika.
Just peak weirdness in a diplomatic context, the kind of request only someone incredibly powerful might even think to make.
Then the internal debates about how to handle the election fallout. Elliott suggesting profit sharing with news orgs.
And Mark shooting it down immediately shows a reluctance to fundamentally change the model.
And his communication style changed again. Back to brief text.
Yeah, less engagement, maybe more certainty or detachment. Hard to say.
The roundtable with world leaders in Peru. Meeting the NZ Prime Minister again. A totally different vibe.
Symbolic, right? From being dismissed to being a peer. Shows Mark's elevated status.
But then the board game argument.
Yeah, her accusing Mark of focusing too much on winning battles, not the war. A metaphor for Facebook strategy. A pretty direct confrontation, comparing his game style to the company's approach. Bold.
Then Mark announces his 2017 challenge, visiting all U.S. states.
Just like a presidential candidate. Especially odd given he supposedly hated travel and crowds, fuels the political ambition speculation.
And his take on the election, blaming media, Facebook's the scapegoat, maybe wants to buy Twitter or reshape news.
It all points towards someone feeling incredibly powerful, maybe wrongly accused, and wanting more control over the narrative.
And her big realization on the flight to Peru, Elliot laying out how the Trump campaign used Facebook.
And she suddenly understands Mark knows Facebook was decisive. He feels like a kingmaker.
And Obama's criticism. Mark's reaction is basically, who does he think he is?
Yeah, a huge shift in self-perception. The kingmaker doesn't like being questioned.
Which leads her to conclude he might actually run for president himself.
It seems logical, if terrifying. He has the playbook, owns the tools, controls the algorithm, has the followers.
And starts planning these state visits, meeting different kinds of Americans. It all fits.
So that descent into Peru becomes this moment of clarity for her. She sees the ambition, the potential path.
And decides she can't be part of it. This is her last trip with him, a major turning point.
A fundamental break based on what she now understands about Mark's goals and Facebook's direction.
After that, she observes how dissent is treated internally. Disagree with Mark or Cheryl, you get sidelined.
But if you enable them, tell them what they want to hear. Big rewards. Creates an echo chamber.
And the Feminist Fight Club starts meeting secretly.
Yeah, women discussing harassment and other issues because they couldn't do it openly shows a lack of trust and safety.
And she experiences harassment herself. Warnings about certain men, lack of accountability.
Paints a picture of a culture where stated values about respect didn't match reality for some, leading to deep disillusionment.
The trust was just eroding completely.
And when she formally reports Joel's behavior to Elliot,
He basically blows it off, offers her a reference instead of investigating.
a complete failure of HR and leadership to address serious misconduct, seemingly, protecting the powerful over protecting employees.
Then she uncovers potential corruption in the Philippines, FCPA violations.
Provides a way to formally document concerns with lawyers, maybe because internal channels failed.
And taking over China policy finds it totally opaque, focused solely on getting in.
Yeah, the priority was market access, seemingly overriding huge human rights concerns.
The details are damning. Agreeing to store data in China, giving the government access, censoring content according to their laws.
Partnering with a local company to do the dirty work, potentially leading to arrests, real harm, a massive moral compromise.
And the quid pro quo. Blocking content critical of the regime in exchange for market access progress.
Explicitly trading censorship for business advantage. Deeply troubling.
Then the unauthorized Facebook apps launched in China anyway, secretly.
Uncovered by the NYT. Suggests internal chaos or rogue actions, high-risk moves.
And the revelation about targeting ads based on emotional states like worthless, then denying it.
Just another massive blow to trust, internally and externally. Exploiting vulnerability, then lying about it.
It all adds up. Trust collapses. Election fallout, harassment ignored, global harm.
Mark downplaying Charlottesville while focusing on trivial stuff, the contrast is stark.
Especially compared to Myanmar. Facebook's role in the violence there becoming undeniable.
The lack of Burmese moderators, the technical issues ignored, the military using Facebook to spread hate, catastrophic negligence.
Understaffing moderators based in Dublin. How could they possibly monitor effectively?
They couldn't. It wasn't prioritized despite the deadly real-world consequences. The military exploited the platform systematically.
Then more inappropriate behavior from Joel at an event.
She confronts Elliot again, realizes nothing will be done.
And then she's fired. Abruptly.
A harsh ending, but maybe predictable, given the toxic environment and her attempts to raise alarms.
What a journey. It's such a stark personal view into the messy reality inside a tech giant.
Absolutely. From those almost mundane diplomatic dances to these huge, world-altering ethical crises, it really shows the human cost and complexity.
You really see how small decisions, or maybe decisions not made, can have these enormous global consequences.
And it forces you to ask, what happens when growth is literally the only thing that matters? How do personal ambitions scale up to global impact?
It's definitely something to reflect on the power these platforms hold, the responsibility that comes with shaping how billions connect and get information.
Hopefully exploring these experiences sparks some critical thinking for everyone listening about these dynamics.
Absolutely. And the question that lingers is, were lessons actually learned from this period? Will things be different going forward for tech?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? How accountability and responsible innovation actually take root. It's an ongoing debate.
Indeed. Well, if you found these insights compelling, and want to keep exploring these kinds of unfiltered perspectives, please do hit that like button.
And follow the channel Audiobook Quiver. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next analysis.
We really appreciate you joining us for this look inside the Facebook story. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.